Welcome everyone to Red Team. In this section, we're gonna be diving in, taking a look at what a red team is, what type of value they add to their customer, how do they differ from pen testers, and then we'll wrap up by looking at a typical life cycle associated with a red team assessment. So with that, let's go ahead and jump right in. So what is a red team? A red team is a group of ethical hackers who, with network owner permission, emulate real-world threat actor tactics and techniques to break into company networks, providing insight and reporting. And I'm gonna give a bunch of extra examples that we can use to better understand this. So number one, right up here, some benefits of a red team assessment. It provides a unique look at networks through the lens of a real world attacker. This creates impact to assessment results. Now I want to give a good example here. Let's say there's a threat actor that's always jumping into these networks and they're installing persistence via scheduled tasks. As the red team, if you're doing an assessment on this customer, you could jump into their networks and set up your persistence with scheduled tasks exactly like that threat actor. This adds a lot of impact. If you do not get discovered during the report out, you could say, we acted exactly like this threat actor and you never caught us. This is a big deal, right? Customers will then have to go evaluate and review their defensive tools, the different settings and configurations they have set up to potentially be able to identify if a threat actor does gain access and install a new scheduled task, they would get notified. So this creates a lot of impact. Again, as the red team, we want to emulate those threat actors. Number two, it tests blue and defensive team response. This is one I didn't really appreciate as much in the beginning when I was learning red team operations, but you could have the most robust defensive team in the world, but if you never test that team, when a real incident occurs, it's gonna be chaos. They're gonna be running through their SOPs, trying to determine what happened, potential compromise. But as the red team, you can go in, execute an assessment just like a threat actor would. If the blue team doesn't know it's a real assessment or not, they can actually run through those SOPs. Now I wanna take this a little step further. Let's say you ran through one of these tests every single month, which is probably too often, but just for the sake of the argument, let's say you ran through one of these every single month. If a real incident did occur, I bet that blue team would have, their entire process, their entire hunt process perfectly nailed down. They would have all the flows in place, all the different steps in place to look for that investigation, and they'd be able to fight off that real world threat actor. So, all that to say, a lot of value can be added to defensive teams. Number three here, it identifies weaknesses in systems or processes. Great example I like to share with this one. Let's say you've just rolled out this massive EDR software suite to your entire enterprise. If you never get a chance to try to test that suite, how do you know it's actually working? You want to be able to upload some malicious tool sets and ensure that that software suite is working effectively. Let's say someone comes in with just an open source red teaming tool. They're able to run it and conduct an operation. You probably need to go revisit that configuration of that EDR, make some changes, and attempt to get it working more effectively. This also tests the security monitoring logs, detections, and more. Again, let's say you come in and do an assessment. Can defensive personnel go back and pull logs correlated with that compromise, right? Maybe they go back and check the logs and they don't exist. They didn't have actual logging enabled. These are all just great scenarios that having a red team come in and conduct a test can uncover a lot of potential gaps in that defensive sphere. And then lastly, for some organizations, especially those processing credit cards and other information like that, there are actually a lot of regulatory requirements that different businesses and different organizations get some type of third-party testing done to ensure that their networks are safe as they store, some of that credit card information. This can be especially important for those that are storing HIPAA or PII type information. Again, a lot of value to be had here. Now I get this question all the time. What is the difference between a pen test and a red team assessment? Well, let's take a look. Now, pen testers typically hit a target with every single scanner they have. They load up their entire suite, they hit, web apps, they try all these different SQL injections, all these different dir busts, trying to see if this target application or platform is secure. This work is also typically done with defensive parties in the know. They know this pen testing group is coming to execute all this testing. Now, in addition, this type of testing can also be done against development-only system. That allows them to execute these SQL injections or other techniques that could lead to system instability and not have to worry about taking down some production server. The customer will set up this development instance, pen testers come in, they hammer the application, they give it the thumbs up or the thumbs down, they give them a list of things to fix, and that's about it. Now let's contrast that with our red team assessment. Red teams will attack a network low and slow. They want to evaluate this entire network, not just a little tiny segment. The goal here is to attack the network exactly like a real world threat actor would do. Again, we're kind of going through those motions that if we were to get compromised by a real world threat actor, what would be that impact? How would they be able to move around in the network? Is that type of activity detected? Now I want to bring your attention right here. Typically red team assessments attempt to bypass detections and not really get caught until the mission objective is accomplished. Now if I can get on my soapbox, this is why tradecraft is so important. I've already mentioned this once, but let's imagine you're planning out a red team engagement. As you can imagine, when it comes to initial access and all these different steps of a red team assessment, it takes months to plan, to set up our infrastructure, to get all the legal paperwork signed and in place. Let's say you put in 3 to 4 months of preparation for this 1 month assessment. Let's say day one, you get on this host and you run the wrong command and EDR just pops immediately. Let's say your end goal was to get to some sensitive enclave of the network. All of that is kind of out of the window now. The defenders are on to you, they've detected your presence in the network, they shut you down, or maybe it goes to some type of whitelisted engagement where you could then progress through, but the defensive parties are in the know at that point. This is why tradecraft is so important. We want to make sure you're using the tools and techniques that have the best chance of not immediately getting caught, so you can move and work towards that mission objective. Now bringing this all home right here, unlike pen testers who want to uncover every possible vulnerability with a network segment or a specific web application, red team operators are really only interested in that low-hanging fruit. We want to know the easiest way to get into a network that is the most likely to avoid detection, because that's what a real-world threat actor wants to do, right? They want to get in these networks and stay in these networks until they're ready to do whatever, ransom the customer or perform something else. They don't want to jump in and get caught immediately. So that's what we're trying to emulate here. Now let's talk red team roles that you would likely see on various red teams that are out there. Number one, right here, you have your operator role. You've already heard me use the term operator, right? But these are all the technical-minded individuals focusing on hands-on keyboard operations. Typically, you might see different classifications of operators. You might see trainees or just kind of middle ground red team operators, and then you might see senior red team operators. Typically, these are just distinctions based on how much experience, how many years of experience they have, or their skill level. Another common role is the developer role. Typically, these developers support red team operations by creating the different tools that operators use in engagements. And kind of a big spoiler alert here, I have seen this role become so much more important as EDR and various defensive software tools have gotten so much better. You really need full-time individuals with those specializations, always tweaking those tools and making them better so red team operators can be successful in their operations. That brings us to the team lead right here, number 3. Typically, team leads are focused on running more of the administrative side of these operations. They make sure that the operators are kind of doing their job, right? Working their way through the network, finding those vulnerabilities, they're gaining access, they're laterally moving, they're working towards that mission objective. The team lead is maybe helping wrap up some of those logs at the end of the day. They're ensuring the target customer, the different trusted agents, which we'll talk about in a little bit, they make sure that they're aware of everything that's going on, and they're just gonna make sure that that assessment is running smoothly. Now, I do wanna note right here, depending on the type of the team, you may see one person wear all of these hats, right? If you have a very small team, or maybe you have a smaller consultant agency, you may have one operator that's doing all the development, they're operating and they're administratively kind of running the assessment and interacting with that target customer. All the way up to giant organizations, 50, 60 different operators, they may have even more specializations within that organization. Moving on along, you have do no harm red team ethics. I don't think it's possible to teach a red team course without, at least covering a little bit of red team ethics. Red team assessments are high stakes engagements. We typically attack production environments where you could take a machine offline and that target organization could lose millions of dollars because that machine is not online serving potential customers. So you have to know exactly what you're running. You have to be very, very careful. In addition, we're always stealing employee access tokens. We're abusing different privileges within Active Directory. A lot of that could look extremely bad on individuals that we're impersonating. So you need to remember all of this. You need to take very, very accurate logs. That way, if your target customer comes back and asks you you about specific activity, you can be very honest and upfront, and that target person may not get in trouble for that. Taking it a step further, assessments can potentially uncover a lot of different personally identifiable information, or what we call PII. Now let's say you're on a machine, you're operating away, and there's some target user that's logged in, you're going through all their files, and you happen across some health information. Although you have access to that health information, it's best just to leave it there. What do they say? Great power comes with great responsibility. Just because you have the potential to do something doesn't mean you should do it. You always want to operate within the bounds of the operation and within the bounds of your ground rules document or your individual red team organization requirements. And honestly, all of this just comes back to our last bullet right here. We want to grow our red team skill sets to make networks safer. We don't want to hamper these networks by running commands we shouldn't, taking down systems, stealing customer PII. All of that is just illegal activity and unethical. We always want to come back to our red team ethics. We're there to make their networks safer. Red team tradecraft. That's probably like a buzzword at this point. I use it all the time, but what does it actually mean? Well, I have a pretty cool definition here. It is simply blending red team activity into normal customer activity flows. Typically before we install an implant on a target, maybe when we're selecting our implant transport protocol, we always want to ask our question, will my, addition to this network blend into what's already there, or will it stand out? And again, bringing it back to those living off the land binaries. If I start running PowerShell on a system with a user that never runs PowerShell, that will stand out. Let's look at another real world example here. If our malicious C2 implant utilizes HTTPS, which we're gonna learn more about this, but HTTPS implants emulate a user browsing a website. So let's say we use an implant, HTTPS, we install that on a machine like a server, which never browses the internet, right? You have all these servers out there, admins aren't just logging into that server and browsing Gmail. That never happens. That would stick out. That is bad tradecraft, and that's some of the stuff we're gonna be teaching in this class. Now, as you're learning these red team techniques, it's important to understand kind of the foundational why behind we're running them and how they work. Understanding these techniques further will allow you to use them in a safe and effective way that is practicing good red team tradecraft. And don't worry, I'm gonna be reinforcing all of this as we progress through the class. And kind of bringing it all home here, remember, this is all to avoid direct suspicion and detection. Detections could kind of ruin that entire assessment that you've spent months setting up and training. Remember, the certification for this course does test a student's ability not only to work through our target scenario, but to utilize that tradecraft along the way. So let's talk threat actors. I already kind of mentioned it. Remember, the goal of red teams is to emulate real-world threat actors. These same actors are gaining access to target networks, installing ransomware, taking machines offline. We want to emulate their TTPs to test a customer's readiness against real-world attackers. Remember my scheduled task story? Well, we kind of mention it here again. I'm not going to read it to y'all again, but basically, if we're using the same TTPs a real threat actor would, it makes our reports even more impactful, saying, hey, we emulated this specific threat actor, you didn't detect our activity, you were at a huge risk level if this actor were to compromise your network. But now we're going to take a look at our red team methodology. This is kind of the life cycle of a red team assessment and what you should expect as we go through this course and our target virtual range. So let me jump straight to number one here, planning and infrastructure. So during this phase of a red team engagement, we're gonna plan the assessment with the customer. As you can imagine, there are a lot of legal documents that need to be put in place authorizing the red team to conduct their assessment. We'll talk a little bit more about these legal documents a little bit later in class. Just know a lot of paperwork needs to get done. Along with that, red teams need to set up their C2 infrastructure and other tools. As I mentioned, red teams set up these fake websites that take all their implant traffic and redirect it back to their team servers. All of that has to be set up per customer. So there's a good amount of time setting up all these websites, making them believable, letting them sit out there for a while. A lot of infrastructure requirements. Moving on to number two, we have recon and development up here. This is where we do all of our network reconnaissance. We run our Nmap tools to actually scan those target environments. We also do our OSINT research. We get on Google, we search for our customer, we see what we can find about that customer that could help us in our assessment. There can be things all the way from customers having passwords publicly available, all the way to they have a job posting that says they're looking for Cisco engineers, so we can kind of put in the back of our minds that they may be using Cisco networking equipment. The other important thing at this step is to develop our phishing campaigns. We're gonna start to take some of the information we know about the customer, and we're gonna start to develop those phishing campaigns. If we're gonna be executing social engineering attacks against this customer, we can kind of start getting some more information at this phase. Moving on along, we have our initial access and interrogation. This is where we actually launch our phishing campaigns. This is where we launch any exploits we may have against target network resources of that customer. We gain our initial access, we conduct our initial situational awareness. This is basically when we go live against that customer attempting to gain initial access. Which brings us to number 4, escalate and fortify. So this is where we install persistence in our customer network. We attempt to escalate our privileges. We execute any lateral movement moving to other machines in the domain. We perform our domain escalation, our domain fortification. And if these terms are new to you, if you don't quite understand what all these are, just hang in there. We're gonna be reviewing all these later on in the course, and you're actually gonna be executing all these things in the scenario. Number 5 is impact. This is where we take a step back and we say, hey, we compromised the customer's domain. We've escalated our privileges. Why are we there? This is kind of the so what to the assessment. What does the customer ultimately want you to do? Do they want us to go loud and get caught by customer defenders, measuring the defender's success against a real world threat actor? Maybe starting to trigger alerts to get defenders looking our way. Maybe we'll get extra loud and start downloading a lot of files from the target. The customer may also have a mission objective where we have to go gain access to some specific sensitive system. Maybe they want us to go after their DevOps pipeline or some source code repository. Again, this is just the mission objective of the entire assessment. Why does the customer want us there? Typically, this was laid out when the assessment was originally created and kind of reviewed with the customer. Click over to the next video and you can continue on with ROPS RT1.